Hello, welcome to another session of the Rewire Your Brain World Summit. My name is Michael Stone. I'm one of the co-producers of the summit and also the founder of Neurodynamic Institute and Neurodynamic Breathwork Online. I'm your co-host for this session, and I'm very happy to be here today with Dr. Catherine Pittman. How are you today? And welcome.
Wonderful. Glad to be here.
So I'd like to introduce you to our audience first by reading your bio, and then we'll jump right into the conversation. Sound okay?
Great.
All right, awesome. Catherine M. Pittman, PhD, HSPP, is a licensed clinical psychologist and psychology professor at St. Mary's College in Notre Dame, Indiana. A practicing clinical psychologist treating anxiety for over 30 years, she also is experienced in neuropsychological rehabilitation with individuals who have experienced brain injuries or strokes. In 2019, she was honored by Rehabilitation Hospital of Indiana with a service award for her work in treating brain injury. Dr. Pittman practices neurologically informed cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and has conducted research in both fear conditioning and neuropsychology, preparing her well for this summit. With Elizabeth Carl, Dr. Pittman authored Rewire Your Anxious Brain, a book recognized for its clear explanation of how to change both the amygdala and cortex in order to make the brain more resistant to anxiety. She also wrote Rewire Your OCD Brain with co-author neuropsychologist William Youngs and a workbook on overcoming anxiety titled Taming Your Amygdala, published by PESI. So let's start with a very basic question. Why should people know the processes that create anxiety in the brain?
Well, I think especially if we're talking to therapists, if we're trying to help people with anxiety, we should understand how it is that it's produced and maintained neurologically. But even for the average person, one thing I can tell you is we all have fear and anxiety as a part of our lives. And these systems in our brain that give rise to fear and to anxiety. They are actually understood probably better than any other structures related to psychological stressor related disorders. If you think about depression, if you think about autism, all kinds of different disorders that people deal with, we don't really know where in the brain to point to say what we're changing when we treat these difficulties. We luckily have some beneficial treatments, but we really don't know sometimes what we're changing in the brain that makes a difference. But in the case of anxiety disorders and trauma-related disorders and OCD and that group of disorders, we have a much better idea about when we're trying to help an individual, what we're trying to change, what structures we're trying to change, and the processes that they give rise to. And so I just don't think there's a person who can't benefit from understanding where fear and anxiety and our experience of stress and, the fight or flight response, where do these things come from? And to try to understand them, you have much more ability to manage them in your life.
Can everyone understand them if they do some reading and research?
This is tricky because whenever you get into neurological kinds of work and we look at the brain is just one of the most complicated structures in the universe. I mean, it's very, very difficult to understand. So when you even talk to therapists, who have advanced degrees, but not necessarily neuroscience, they say, I'm not sure I can understand the complexities of all this. But what we found is that you don't have to understand or even be able to name all the neurological structures involved in order to understand some of these processes. And one of the things that I've really worked on in my books is to try to make the neurobiology understandable to people, not by explaining, neurons and neurotransmitters and identifying all kinds of brain structures, but by trying to explain how the processes work. So, for example, there's two different pathways to anxiety in the brain that need to be understood if you really want to change a person's responses or your own responses in stress-producing situations. And if you understand both of those pathways, now in understanding them, one of the things that I think it's important to recognize is that they both can learn and they both can be changed, but they learn in different ways. We're talking about the cortex and the amygdala. So understanding how to make those changes in those different parts of the brain, you don't need to understand you don't even honestly have to know how to point to where they are, but you do need to know how they learn and change if you want to be able to make a difference in your own experience and responses related to fear and anxiety.
So once we understand that, can we find ways to actually eliminate an anxiety?
Oh, eliminate anxiety. Yeah, that's the trick there. Well, you know what? The human animal is an anxious animal, and that has been very beneficial to us across the centuries. We're alive because, as I like to say it, we are the descendants of the frightened people. You know, if you were a person who didn't have good reactions in a danger situation, when you were under threat, if you didn't have the ability to respond quickly, and also if you didn't recognize threats and protect yourself and your family, then you didn't live to pass on your genes to another generation, or your children didn't live. And so what has happened is those people who are more cautious and had more fear, when we were the prey to predators, when we were facing all kinds of adversity in the world, which luckily is really, really reduced right now, we really needed a fight or flight response. We really needed ways to escape from dangers that were rapid, that were based in learning experiences, but also kind of automatically kind of programmed into us so that we were kind of prepared to be afraid, for example, of water maybe, or of heights. It seems like we have some automatic fear of these and little animals with sharp teeth, you know, that those fears are somewhat built into us in ways. There's a preparedness we talk about. So understanding that that we needed anxiety and we needed fear in order to survive as a species. We're not the biggest and the baddest, you know. We had other individuals, other humans, and we had other animals that had some advantages on us. So we had to rely on other abilities to escape. So what I say to people is, this means that built into us from centuries of experiences with danger and different kinds of threats, we have, as a part of our makeup, a fight or flight response, a tendency to become afraid in certain situations, feelings. Now we actually have worries. As we got more complicated, we developed the ability to worry and to have anxiety. All of that is part of the human condition. And to tell you the truth, you know what? I do not want to get on the road, on the highway, if I'm on there with people who don't have any anxiety. I want there to be some fear that people have when they get behind those wheels with, you know, thousands of pounds of metal at their disposal. We need to have some cautiousness and anxiety. So here's the thing. Can we as therapists eliminate anxiety? No, not even our own anxiety. We can't completely eliminate it. But what we can do is we can make sure that it doesn't compromise our lives and it doesn't limit our ability to reach our goals. So one of the first things that I encourage when I'm talking to clients is to say, I can't promise you that all of your anxiety would go away. I can't even get rid of mine. But one thing that I want to do is help you reach the goals you have and not allow the anxiety to limit you. And the truth is, there's many times that those anxious responses have saved people's lives. And we might, you know, take some time to talk about them as we're discussing the different parts of the brain that create anxiety.
When a client knows about the role of the amygdala in creating anxiety, do they respond differently in therapy?
Yeah, I think the cortex contributions to anxiety don't really surprise anyone. It's our thinking brain. But there's this other part in our brain called the amygdala. And that's the part of the brain that really creates fear. It creates the fight or flight response, which really would be more appropriately called the fight, flight, or freeze response, because the amygdala allows us to detect danger, and then it puts into action thousands of changes in our body that make us more able to react in a way that protects us. Often that means running away, and it requires a lot of changes. So that means, blood flow has to shift in our body, and our heart rate has to increase, and our digestive processes need to shut down so that we're more able to use our extremities. There's a whole lot of processes that go on. And the amygdala is the part that both kind of decides, is this dangerous and should there be a reaction? And it also puts into action all of these changes in our body, even including things like dilating your pupils, making your mouth dry, shutting down your stomach. It's just, there's so many things that happen, and it can happen just in fractions of a second, these changes in our body. And that makes us able to survive certain things. And I think most of us will talk about times that we maybe were on the road driving, something comes into our lane, and you react so quickly that you can't even think about what you've done. You've done it before you have time to think. And in fact, if you really know the way the brain works, our amygdala is set up, and this is very surprising to people, our amygdala is set up to see and hear things and feel things before we, the person, hears and sees, feels them. And it's because of the way the information comes in, say, from our eyes, has to be processed at the back of our head in the occipital lobes. So the information has to get all the way from the back part of our eyes and be taken back here. And that takes it's less than a second. But before it gets all the way back there, the amygdala, which is, I'm kind of pointing to it, kind of even with your ear and your eye here, where the fingers here would be pointing to in there. There's one on the left and one on the right. The information gets to the amygdala first. And so the amygdala is able to detect and react to an object coming into your lane on the highway before the information even gets to the back of your brain, where you need it to get before you can actually see and process it. Now, that also, by the way, I do want to say that's good that we have that ability. It helps us to get really good information about the back part of our brain. The occipital lobes really help us interpret the situation and get details. But the amygdala doesn't need all those details. It doesn't need to know who's driving the car. It doesn't need to try to think about what are the reasons why this occurred, which is what our cortex might do. The amygdala simply needs to activate muscle reactions. And sometimes people think this is a reflex or something. It's not a reflex. A reflex is if, say, you touch something hot with your fingers, and the sensation of that heat or pain or whatever goes to your spinal cord, and then messages come back. A reflex comes right back from the spinal cord, pull the hand back, and all it's doing is a message from this location to your spinal column, your spinal cord, and then back. But you know what? We're talking about, you see, your amygdala gets the information. It's happening in your brain. Or if it were something like someone tapped you on the shoulder or grabbed your amygdala is going to react to that feeling faster than you can think about what it is. And so we have these different pathways happening. And when you start to understand that, and you understand, well, one thing you're going to recognize is, I can't stop the amygdala from reacting and creating these reactions in my body, because they literally happen before I even see anything. So you're kind of behind the curve if you really understand the way the brain is set up. But that person whose amygdala reacted to something coming into the lane on the highway and immediately put into motion the reactions that allowed them to move their hands, drive to the other side, or hit the brake, or hit the accelerator, move around, but do something with your muscles very quickly. And often you're kind of afterwards thinking to yourself, now what happened? What was that? Because it happens so fast that you don't feel you're in control. The question is, who's in control? It's the amygdala promoting responses that could save your life. And all of us have had some experiences like this. But the truth is, we don't always need to run or fight or freeze. We've kind of adapted to using parts of those reactions. So you're in a car, you don't have to run, you just, hit the accelerator, but the amygdala is making use of that. The amygdala is reacting to the dangers in the 21st century. The amygdala is reacting to them and using what it can physically to save you. Sometimes it is jumping back. If you're organizing your closet and you kind of hear strange noise and all of a sudden you get a sense of dread and you kind of just jump back far and the bowling ball falls right where you were standing, and you're like, oh my God, so glad I jumped away from that. But once again, things like that are done quickly because the amygdala takes charge of us and literally hijacks our brain in a way, says, just stop thinking about who's driving the car, what color the car is, and stop obsessing about, like, should I turn right? Should I turn left? Should I hit the brake? You don't have time to think. You just have to react. And the amygdala just takes charge, does something. And hopefully it's the right thing. Many of us have experienced that. So once you know that, you think differently about things. So for example, if you know it reacts before you react, then you say, I can't even think through my thoughts. And so I cannot blame myself when I engage in these reactions. It's not really my thinking self in charge of these reactions. So the person says, also, I'm not crazy either. Like, what's happening is a normal process that's been going on for centuries. And very often it doesn't make sense in the 21st century. Like, if someone comes up behind you and grabs your shoulder, you may turn around and be ready to hit that person. And it really could be related to the fact that your amygdala reacted as if it were a threat, where someone might be playing a joke on you, or someone might just be glad to see you in the grocery store. And they're just, hey, I haven't seen you for years, but you're like, ready to jump at them. And recognizing that you're not crazy, you've got a process going on inside you that comes from the amygdala, and it has a good purpose. It's intended to protect you, but it doesn't always fit our 21st century lives. When some of the biggest dangers we might have, for example, are not being able to pay the mortgage. And no matter how fast you run or who you hit, it doesn't help with that problem. So we have so many situations in which we don't understand what this is we're feeling. And once you do, I think it really helps people to get a different explanation for what's happening. And it helps them sort out what they can control, what they can't control. And when you talk about how these processes work and what influences them, that the amygdala reacts to environmental cues. And, it's not always that the thing that it's reacting to seems dangerous to you. So here's an example. Let's just take an example. The amygdala is set up to learn from your experiences in the 21st century. So let's say you're in a car accident where a friend of yours is driving and maybe you break a leg. Maybe the car just gets damaged, but it's a bad emotional experience. It's very stressful to have gone through that. And what you find later is that as you try to get into a car to sit in the passenger seat again, and that's where you were when this accident happened, you feel a sense of dread. You might find yourself trembling, your mouth goes dry, get a nauseous feeling, and you just do not want to be in that situation. Now, it's not that the amygdala says things to you. It creates physical reactions. It creates emotional reactions, or reactions that the cortex can interpret emotionally. And so the amygdala does not say, don't get in this car, but every ounce of your being is saying, getting in this car does not feel right? You get the idea. Now, where did that come from? Well, I said the amygdala has the ability to learn from your experiences. And what it does not learn logically. And I hate to tell you, the amygdala doesn't learn from anything we're talking about like today. It doesn't learn from lectures or reading a book. It learns from experience. And so it experienced that when I was in this part of a car with a door on this side, a very bad thing happened. And to protect you, the amygdala is basically saying, don't put yourself back in that situation. That was dangerous. So there's a threat now. And this has to do with how the amygdala can form memories of experiences, and it can change something that was a neutral thing before into a trigger that now you react to with fear. And it can be an object or a sound. I once was surprised that my wife was feeling really anxious in a hotel room where we were staying. And I said, why are you feeling so anxious? She said, for some reason, I'm just thinking about my combat experiences. I do not know why. And I said, what's going on? Because she's an Air Force veteran. And so she just got quiet. And then she said, that sound, the refrigerator is making that sound. She said, that's what a air raid siren sounds like from 5 miles away. And her amygdala was reacting to that sound, and she could figure that out. Many times we don't know. I had a client once who was very anxious at her in-laws at events like Thanksgiving and at baby showers, and she didn't understand why she was reacting with such fear. And she would get in actually not always fear, sometimes irritability and anger. And she even detected that before she was going to a family event, sometimes she would get into these arguments with her husband and say, you just go yourself. But she said, it doesn't make any sense. My in-laws are not bad people. I don't know why I'm reacting. We were able to kind of, with some work, think about the situations that bothered her. And they were people sitting in a circle. They always came down to people in a circle of some kind around the Thanksgiving table, at a baby shower, playing a game, different things like that, sitting around the campfire out back or whatever. And she was able to identify that there was a time she was in a circle where she experienced dangers when she was a child and she had a bad stutter, and a teacher was trying to get her to read a book along with other children in the circle. And she was stuttering, and the teacher kept making her start over, and she was very anxious and embarrassed. And she was able to say, wow, I would never have connected that with this. But she said, basically, my amygdala thinks this is a dangerous situation. So sounds and sights and situations, the amygdala is able to change them from just a neutral thing that doesn't bother you into a trigger for anxiety. And what happens is, if you understand this process, you feel so much better about yourself, And sometimes people say, my family doesn't understand this. And I say, if they don't understand, that's not the most important thing. The important thing is you understand. I understand. We know what you're going through, and we know ways to change it, because the amygdala can learn to get back into that car. The amygdala can learn to, it's designed to be able to continue learning. It learns new fears of things that didn't even exist when it was kind of formed back in our ancient history. It can learn fears of things that don't even make sense, like the sound of a refrigerator. But you can understand on its way of looking, it's trying to look for cues that were somehow associated with a threat in the past and trying to keep you out of those situations. But that kind of emotional learning is very confusing to people. And here's the thing, we don't have to go through the whole process of explaining classical conditioning, which is what that's all about. But we can just explain to people that the amygdala learns to fear certain things, and it learns them not logically. Say, here, an example very common, if a woman is sexually assaulted while, say, some Rolling Stones song is playing, when she hears that Rolling Stones song later, she can have a panic attack, even though that song had nothing to do with the terrible thing that happened to her. It's not logical. It's completely about pairing. It's about pairing. It's association learning. So in order to change your amygdala, you have to understand how to teach it. And you have to understand that there's a process where if you give it some experience with being in the passenger seat of a car or sitting in a circle, and things are allowed to occur and you don't escape it, the amygdala learns from that. The amygdala is not forever afraid. And even things that it's almost like it's built into us, so many common phobias like being afraid of various animals, being afraid of bugs, being afraid of heights. These are things that are so common in humans that we're pretty sure that we're almost prepared to learn these fears. They just happen too often to be a result of everyone's individual experiences. We're just kind of ready to become afraid of an animal, or we're ready to become afraid of a spider. And it's so funny if you think about it, because our kids walk out in front of a car, but they shriek when they see a tiny little spider. See, so that tells you the amygdala isn't just a blank slate. It's carrying some wisdom from our backgrounds, right? But here's what it is. We know even those things that are, quote, kind of built into us, we can get over. I think that you'll see people when you go into big cities, there are people hanging off the sides of buildings, washing windows, and they're 30 stories up there. And those people's amygdalas have had to deal with what that feels like to be in that situation. And we can do it. We can do it. And I know there's probably a bunch of people listening to this right now that actually even sleep with little sharp-toothed animals in their beds. And we don't have fear of that, even though someone might admit, when I was young, I was afraid of dogs, or when I was young, but I got over my amygdala, learned that. So the amygdala is always able to learn. But how does the average person know how to teach it? How does the average person even know there is an amygdala? We're not given an instruction booklet for our brain when we're born, that these are the parts of our brain and this is how they operate. So understanding the amygdala can really help a person to, one, feel like this is just a part of me, and there's also another part of me that understands that this situation isn't dangerous. I just have to teach this amygdala part of me, and I got someone here who knows how to teach the amygdala. So I'm in good stead, with somebody who understands that. And then also to realize that what you're doing is completely natural as a human being, and you're not a crazy person. And other people are very unkind sometimes and will say, you're not even, this doesn't make any sense. Your feelings aren't real. These are very real feelings. I want to say we can measure these changes in our body occurring. We can measure changes in heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, digestive this is a real experience. So when people say, this isn't even real, you're feeling something real. The situation, I guess you have to understand, is I can be completely terrified of something that poses no danger to me. And that's because the amygdala is going to operate to protect you. And remember I said the amygdala gets information before you get it in your cortex? It's the cortex that provides all the detailed information about things. The amygdala just gets kind of a quick and dirty picture of it. It doesn't get all this carefully processed information. It just sees something coming into your lane, right? It wouldn't have the details of what kind of car it is and who's driving and all. It's just a sense of there's an object coming into your lane and it's big and, could be identified as a potential threat. Well, the fact that the amygdala makes mistakes is another good thing that people benefit from. To say you can be in the shower and you can be washing your hair and getting ready, feeling calm, and all of a sudden you see something in the corner that is like a little round thing with something sticking out in it, and it just looks very much like a spider kind of image, right? And so you can be jumping back and pressing yourself against the shower curtain and your heart's pounding. You're like, oh, shit, what's in there? And then suddenly you see it's a clump of hair that's just down there, right? And it is not an insect of any kind. But the thing is, if it had been something that could poison you, something that was dangerous, you've reacted to and protect yourself, right? But it takes a little while for that information to get to your cortex back here, the occipital lobes, so it gets processed in detail. The amygdala doesn't have that detail. So sometimes the amygdala is just plain wrong about something. But if you understand the process going on, then you recognize it's trying to protect me. I know what's going on, but I don't always have to trust it. So we start to learn some of these feelings we have in our body, where we feel a sense of dread, where we feel a feeling we have to get away from this situation, or you just feel like you've got to hit someone or fight, that you're being restricted or harmed in some way, and you just have to, when we feel those things, we can recognize a certain part of us, can kind of recognize this may not be necessary. But in the moment, and that's the other thing, don't expect it. Here's something that's really important. Don't expect when you do realize that that's not a spider, that poof, your fears and your heart rate and everything, boom, all go back to normal. Because hormones have shifted in your body. A lot of different activities have occurred in your autonomic nervous system to make you ready, prepared for us to be able to make a response. And so as you have that occur, it's not going to turn off. So for example, take a little girl who's going down into the basement and she sees kind of a shrouded figure in the corner there. And her amygdala reacts to it as if it's a danger. There's a threat here. There's this figure. But as she just freezes a little there, the information gets back to her occipital lobes and she sees it's a suit coat on a hanger there, right? So there's that suit coat on a hanger. And then she does feel a little, because it's not, but it's not a complete relief. She's still feeling her heart pounding. She's still having a sense of, should I run upstairs or should I go back down? I don't know what to do. And that can lead you to just say to yourself, I don't feel this is right. I'm not going down this basement. Even though you have the accurate information, there is a suit coat hanging there and there's no danger. The feeling in your body now, the feeling of dread, the feeling of activation, that feeling is going to really be, it's going to be kind of a cue to you that maybe this is not a place you should be, even though you're not sure why you feel that way. Or you do know why you feel that way because this coat scared you, but the feeling is not going away immediately. So you say, well, I just can't be down here. And you go back upstairs. So you see how once you understand these processes that are going on, you have more ability to kind of question the accuracy of emotional reactions, because sometimes they are inappropriate to the situation. They are a false alarm. But I want to say, this isn't like, you crazy person, why can't you recognize a false alarm? Remember, if your engine light is on the car, that's just a flashing light. Or if smoke detectors are going off and making a sound, that's just a sound. This is actually a feeling of alarm. It's not just an alarm going off. It's a feeling of dread. It's a feeling that has been associated, with this process of needing to escape. We feel it. It's a lot harder to disregard that kind of a feeling. So you can see that this really helps people to start to sort out what it is that's potentially going on in their lives and how they don't have complete responsibility for it. If you think about it, you have a part of your brain that operates in a time period, and by controlling things that you do not have the ability to control. You can't say to yourself, stop heart rate, calm down. You can't say to tell yourself to get that stomach motility going again, or, I want things to go back to normal. Put that cortisol back in, you can't do that. Your cortex can't do these things. Only the amygdala,
Thank you for that. That's super interesting. Once a person sees that they have a response to something that clearly, when they think about it, okay, this isn't dangerous, this is coming from somewhere else, is it important that they actually go back and find the original experience where that was created, or does it really matter?
It doesn't really matter. That's the good thing. Sometimes we don't really know. How did you ever get this fear of clowns? Where did this come from? I don't know where you got this. Sometimes people say I know where this came from or whatever. But sometimes people don't know. But, as long as we know what triggers you, like, let's say we never figured out why that woman was afraid of sitting in a circle. We figured out that sitting in a circle was what triggered her. So what we can do is set up situations in which she sits in a circle, stays in there for her fear to go down. This is a process called exposure that teaches the amygdala. And you have to make sure nothing negative happens. People make fun of her, or something bad happens in some way. She gets embarrassed, and you got to make sure this is a safe experience, because we're trying to teach the amygdala this is safe. So you put the person back in that situation and you wait for their fear not to go to zero, but to go down by half. And the thing that's great is the person actually feels their amygdala reacting to the learning opportunity. They say, I can feel calming down. I can feel it calming down. I can feel myself calming down, knowing that that's the amygdala taking in new information and saying, wait a minute, there's nothing wrong with this situation, and that experience is so empowering for people. They don't have to know the way they learned, the place they learned it. But like, let's say, my wife, the Air Force vet, didn't know why this crazy noise from the refrigerator was, but we could expose her to that noise and she would get over it as long as nothing negative happened to her. Great. While she was being exposed. We do this repeatedly. A process called exposure.
Is there anything else about the amygdala that everybody should know that would be helpful, or have you pretty much covered it at this point?
Well, I've been trying to say all that I can, but I guess one thing is to realize that there are parts of you that are operating without you being able to control them. And I think this is pretty obvious, like you aren't controlling your heart rate, or you have no idea how information coming in from light waves hitting the back of your retina gets turned into your visual. So, there's things going on you don't know. As you start to recognize the amygdala can't be completely controlled, and that in a way you could say it has good intentions, it's intending to protect you, it makes for an ability to have a mindfulness kind of about it, to be able to observe it and to be less caught up in the feelings. And that's what people will say. Sometimes people say, I can feel I have the beginnings of a panic attack coming on. And I'm like, amygdala, it's not going to happen. I am going to push through this situation. And they start to recognize that they do not have to kind of honor some of the experiences in their body, that they are they're really out of sync in terms of the century we live in, And, it's like my students will say, I don't know what good fighting, fleeing, or freezing helped me with my exams. And I say, that's exactly the problem. Your anxiety interferes with your testing. I guess the one last thing I would really try to say is important is when the amygdala creates anxiety, this is an important thing to keep in mind, because people tend to think their anxiety will be the worst when they're in the situation. Like, think about this. Someone will say, I'm really nervous. I'm getting ready to give the speech later this afternoon. And then they'll say, my anxiety is getting worse as I get closer. I'm going to have to go into the classroom. My anxiety is really getting worse. I'm not the first speech, but my anxiety is getting worse. And then they say, if I feel this bad, how am I going to feel when I get up there and talk? It's just building. But the truth is, if you really consider situations like that, the anxiety is less when you get up and start talking. Now, that is so weird. People are like, what, really? So people will tell me, I'm so afraid of flying. They say, I'll get into the airport and my anxiety is going up. I'm, in the boarding area. And then I feel like, if I'm this scared in the boarding area, I cannot get on the plane. How am I going to feel then? And I say, less afraid. And they say, why? But here's the thing. Remember why the amygdala was developed. It was developed to protect us from predators and dangers. And if the amygdala only reacts the strongest when it's in the situation, it's kind of late. Like, the amygdala can't react when you're in the tiger's mouth. See what I'm saying? You need to react before. So understanding the other thing about the amygdala that really helps is that the amygdala will produce an anticipatory response. It will make your fear and anxiety the worst before you get into the situation. And once you get in the situation, as long as nothing bad happens, as long as you stand up and you start talking and no one starts, laughing or shaking their head and but if you get up there and you start talking and everybody's listening and there's no indication of danger, your amygdala will stand down. I mean, your amygdala does react. I like to say it's kind of like, when you got that GPS in your car and it's telling you to go a certain way, and then you're driving and you see this kind of maybe an accident or just a traffic tie up, and you say, I am not going this way. I'm going to go to the right. And so what does your GPS, the voice starts telling you things like, make a U-turn, make a U-turn, make a U-turn. And you're, going a new way. But you know what? Eventually the GPS will say rerouting, and it will adjust to the new pathway. This is what the amygdala does too. It's like, don't go in there. Don't do it. Don't go in the classroom. Don't give the speech. And then when you get up there and you start giving the speech, it's like rerouting, looking okay. It's like, it's looking, I can adjust to this. It's not that thing. It doesn't continue. The amygdala will calm down.
So it sounds like that's one of the ways that we can really diffuse, in essence, our response to what happens with the amygdala. Are there other specific interventions that either self-interventions or therapeutic interventions that can be done that directly target the amygdala?
This is what is so helpful, because we now have ways to image the brain and we can literally see the amygdala when it's more active and when it's less activated. Because we can see that, we've been able to study different things to see what kind of things will calm down the amygdala from its activated state as it's trying to activate other parts of our body. And because we have imaging, and we've only had this, in the last 20 years that we've been able to do these kind of studies, we've been able to figure out, for example, something that I used to try to get people to do so much, but before I was introducing the role of the amygdala, people just, they didn't want to do it. It's like certain kinds of diaphragmatic breathing. People are like, yeah, breathing. No, don't even bother teaching me that. I don't believe that's going to work. But when you say, you know what, I want to tell you, this can calm the amygdala down faster than taking Xanax. Xanax, you got to ingest it. It's got to get into your stomach, be digested, brought to your brain, where it actually, and it's affecting a lot more parts of your body than just your amygdala. So you're like medicating a whole system when you don't need it. You just need it in the amygdala. People say, wait, what? This is faster? I say, yeah, in 10 minutes, we can see your amygdala calming down. If you could look at the fMRI, and it's like a picture, it goes from being bright red activated down to orange, yellow, with just people deep breathing. Now, this has been a game changer, that people believe that these interventions work because we have some brain evidence, right? Before we didn't have that. But we didn't know that it tended to help people, but it just sounds so simple and ridiculous. But it really has to do with the fact that the amygdala is tied into the observing our body. And if the body is calming down, that gives feedback to the amygdala. The other things that I'll just mention kind of briefly are sleep. We need long hours of sleep, because REM sleep, which happens the most in the second half of the night, you really want to get REM sleep, because the more REM sleep that you get, the less activated the amygdala seems to be. And there's studies that show this. So we figure out that if you tell people to sleep more, which especially in the US, people do not believe in sleep. They're like, I'll sleep when I'm dead, forget it. But it really helps you. And I've had people who tell me, I don't want to take medicine. And I say, well, if you can work with breathing and sleep and one other thing, and that's going to be exercise, you may be able to calm down your amygdala without using any medication. We can work on that. Let's start there. And it's amazing that people will really feel like I'm a different person. I didn't know I could calm down this part of by changing some of my life habits, by sleeping more, by using deep, slow breathing, muscle relaxation. And then the other thing is exercise. Exercise is something that in two ways affects the amygdala. If your amygdala is activated and you go for a run or even a brisk walk or go for a swim, do something for 20 minutes, the amygdala really becomes less activated. It's almost like a homeostatic mechanism that the amygdala set up to make us do some kind of physical reaction, run away, fight, something like that. And if we do it, even though it has nothing to do with, like I tell my students who say, I'm worried about my senior thesis, I have to present it. What can I do to help me be more calm? I say, just before you come, take a half an hour walk around campus and then report for your speech. You'll be much calmer. And they say, it's true, but they still have to give the speech. They still have to do it. But that exercise, it helps deactivate the amygdala. And we could go into talking about, what are actually the neurotransmitter processes or what, but the truth is it doesn't matter if you know them or not. If you just know exercise helps you, and it helps in the moment. Like if I'm feeling stressed, like let's say the dean calls me, says she needs to talk to me, and a little worried. I rush over there, not because I'm such an obedient professor, I rush over there because I know when I go quickly, it's going to calm down my amygdala. So that I'm like, okay, I'm feeling pretty relaxed. Now what you got to tell me, so those are things you can do, even though they're not logical. And then if you exercise regularly, it seems to make some relatively permanent changes in your amygdala that are sustained as long as you're on a regular exercise program. It seems that your amygdala is not as kind of the resting state, if you thought of it that way. It's not as activated. So we see people who's just in general, because they're exercising regularly, their amygdalas seem less activated. And I've had people tell me, when I cut out an exercise program because I had to, because of this happened or that, an injury happened, or they said my anxiety went through the roof and I had no idea it was keeping that anxiety down. And it's really connected with the amygdala that's the source of that.
How does the cortex affect the amygdala during or in regards to anxiety?
Okay, this is a very important thing to know. Now, remember, our cortex is our thinking brain. That's the part of our brain when you're trying to figure things out or you're arguing with yourself about, it's not logical to be afraid of getting into the passenger seat of a car with my sister. She's a good driver. She wasn't the person I had the accident with. I don't have any reason. The streets are clear. There's no reason I should be worried. There's no ice or what, No. All of that is the cortex's way of thinking about things. But the amygdala isn't going to listen to any of that logic, or the amygdala, remember, learned just on the basis of parents. So many times we find what we try with the cortex doesn't work. If you try to give a logical reason why you shouldn't be afraid to go to your in-laws, or you shouldn't be afraid of a sound or whatever, that's coming from your cortex and makes perfect sense to your cortex, but it's not going to affect the amygdala. And this is reflected in, if you look at the connections in the brain from the cortex down to the amygdala versus the connections from the amygdala up into the cortex, there are so many more connections from the amygdala up into the cortex where it can affect our thinking, whereas the connections going the other way are pretty limited. So another way, the amygdala has more ways to influence the cortex, including kind of shutting it down, making you not be able to think very clearly, while meanwhile the amygdala just has you focus on freezing or running, and your thoughts are just not clear. So what about the cortex, though? Can it ever be a bad influence on the amygdala? There's where the cortex has all kinds of power, and that's so sad. Because we are able to think of things that never happened, because we're able to, like when my daughter was driving, I was able to say things like, she's not home and it's her curfew. She's 10 minutes late. She could be upside down in a ditch. The roads are so icy. And so I have these images that I'm scaring myself with. But more importantly, I'm scaring the amygdala, because the amygdala monitors the cortex. I like to say the amygdala watches cortex television. right? So if you're watching scary movies, like you're thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be late in paying my taxes. I'm not going to be able to pay my taxes. Even though the amygdala doesn't quite know what taxes are, this sense that there's this threat coming where people are going to be upset with you, where you are going to be a bad person and you'll get disapproval. This is the kind of thing that the amygdala is like, what? This is scary. This is scary. So the amygdala reacts to your thoughts. So sometimes it's not the amygdala hearing a sound or seeing a situation. Sometimes you're in a perfectly safe situation, like sitting at your breakfast table, drinking a cup of coffee, but you're thinking about this presentation you're supposed to give but for your colleagues today and how it is that they're going to criticize you, and you're going over possible criticisms they're going to have, and you start to have so much anxiety because the amygdala is watching that happen. And there's no evidence that the amygdala has any way of distinguishing between thoughts that come from an actual experience we have or thoughts that we are just imagining, especially when you know that the same parts in the brain are being activated, like whether you're playing the piano or thinking about playing the piano, right? So if you're thinking about something happening, the amygdala reacts to that. And while that can be good because sometimes the cortex sees a danger that the amygdala didn't get, because the amygdala is like, I don't understand that, I don't know why that would be dangerous, like, for example, if you got an envelope in the mail and you knew that was, that could be like a termination notice of some kind for your employment or whatever, the amygdala is never going to react to fear to an envelope, but your interpretation of that envelope, what that envelope means, before you even open it, you might have just the feeling of the cortisol reaction in your whole body is like, oh my God, your amygdala is reacting to the thought you have that you are going to lose a job. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So what we need to do is to help people see when their anxiety starts in the amygdala. And that's the case when you're dealing with phobias or PTSD, where there's been trauma, and it's really reacting to stimuli in the environment, and the amygdala is reacting to them as though they're dangerous. But when you have your anxiety starts from the thoughts that you're having, which is so common in OCD, in generalized anxiety disorder, when a person is dealing with social anxiety and they're anticipating all the ways people could reject them or criticize them, those kind of things, when you're having those kind of thoughts, the amygdala reacts. And, I find in cognitive therapy, stuff I've done for years, that when I didn't talk about the amygdala and I just was talking about, you don't know that those people were thinking those thoughts about you, or you don't know that your speech is going to go wrong. People would get into conversations with me about something like, but I don't know what's going to go right either. I can't be 100% sure. Can you say for sure it's going to, and it was very hard. You'd say, okay, well, so maybe what do you think the chances are? And they'd say 10%, but I can't look away from that 10%. It could still happen. You can't tell me it's not going to, and you end up arguing about this thought over and over and over, and they can't let go of it. But, I found once you introduce the amygdala and I say, okay, we're not sure your husband's cheating on you. Okay. He could be. I don't really think so. And you're not even very sure. You do admit it's a small probability here. You don't have any evidence. Basically, you just said he won't let you look at his phone. That's all the evidence you have. And there could be a lot of reasons why he might do that. But anyway, what I want you to think about is, if you are thinking about him cheating on you in the way that you are, and you're kind of imagining who and imagining what, that's activating your amygdala, and you're suffering a lot. Now, do you want to do that? Do you want to suffer? Because if you would think about other things and not get yourself on the infidelity channel in your brain, right? Then let's wait to have you react to infidelity until we have evidence of infidelity, because you could suffer for 2 years before you ever find out for sure if there was or wasn't any infidelity. right? So it's interesting once you introduce the amygdala and people understand more how the brain is functioning, they start to be more willing to admit that it's not worth it to dwell on certain thoughts because of the effect they have on the amygdala. Not because they say, I'm completely comfortable that it's not going to happen, but they say bad things happen to me just when I just think about it. And it doesn't prevent it from happening, right? So I'm not doing myself any favors by thinking about this constantly. You're right.
So it goes in both directions, really. Like the cortex affects the amygdala, and also it goes the other direction where the amygdala has impact on the cortex too.
Yes, the amygdala can actually, well, let's say your heart is pounding and you're feeling sweaty and activated. Sometimes your cortex will think things like, I'm having a heart attack. I'm having a heart attack. And that's coming from your cortex. And then your amygdala is like, oh my God, we're in a terrible situation. And on top of it, we're having a heart attack. You know, no. So what you think does matter. Like I said, you know, the amygdala watches cortex television. So be careful what channel you tune yourself to. And we talk a lot about worry and how when you generate worries, which are these possible negative outcomes, you're thinking this could happen or that could happen or this could happen. It really activates your amygdala. So you're paying a price for that. And we try to kind of analyze why is it that we worry? It has to have some kind of positive benefit. And I think the reason worry has turned out to be something that has developed in the human frontal lobes, in the left frontal lobe, where we have these kind of worry circuits, is because we also have the ability to plan. And if we have a worry that we can make a plan about, then we can kind of head off some of these problems we're worried about. You know, so, but the thing is, worrying itself doesn't do anything. It just activates the amygdala. But if you have a worry that you can't, say, pay your mortgage this month, and you just keep thinking, I'm going to be kicked out of my house, I'm going to be, you know, I'm going to have to tell my partner that I've let her down, you know, and all these negative things. And this is going to affect the kids. And just even the idea, you know, this is just terrible, just all the way that you are worrying about it. If you don't make a plan, then all you're doing is soaking in scary thoughts. But if you say, okay, this is what I teach my clients. If you notice you're worrying, you have to say, oh, I'm worrying. What is this supposed to help me with? It's supposed to help me make a plan. Okay, so if I don't think I can pay my mortgage, is there someone I could borrow money from? Or could I get an extension? Do I even know if they're going to evict me? So you start to come up with a plan. I think I could borrow money from so-and-so, and maybe from this person and this person, because maybe neither one of them has the whole thing. And I'm going to get paid, you know, this summer. I'll pick up a little extra money. I can pay them back by then. So you come up with a plan, right? Now, the key thing then is to move on. You don't go back to worry. You don't need worry anymore. It's done its job. It's alerted you to a potential danger and helped you come up with a plan, right? And so I will often just try to say, when you detect worry, know that what you're supposed to do, if you're doing worry adaptively, the way it probably developed in humans, it helped us to make plans that we could then use to protect ourselves, right? And then that plan is what's good. And once you have the plan in mind, you don't even have to do it. You might just hold on and see if do the insurance companies pay you by that time so you can pay your bill, your mortgage. I'm waiting on those insurance payments, you know. But if you just hold the plan, knowing I've got a plan in case it happens, you move on with your day. You don't go back to worry, right? So trying to understand how best to use the circuitry that we have in our brain and our cortex, the worry circuitries in the cortex, in our amygdala, how to do that. And remember that the amygdala learns by having new experiences that can teach it new responses. It has to get back in contact with the trigger with nothing negative happening. Now, the cortex, on the other hand, it can learn in all kinds of ways. Like it can learn from, as we're talking about this, and a person saying, oh my goodness, I have to stop taking my anxiety so seriously. Just because I feel anxious doesn't mean I'm really in danger. I realize that. Like, how many times do I have so much anxiety before a test and I end up getting a decent grade. So I should have known this. Okay, now I got this. So that's the cortex learning and trying to alert you to not take a feeling so seriously, to say, yeah, this has been wrong before. I'm just anxious because of this is the way the brain works. Another thing is the cortex. You've got to be careful when you tell people to stop thinking something, because telling yourself to stop thinking something doesn't help you stop it. Like if I tell you right now, Michael, stop thinking about pink elephants. How does that affect you? You haven't thought about pink elephants all day, but now when I say, just don't let a pink elephant come into your head, you're like, I'm seeing pink elephants now. And that's because we can't deactivate circuitry in our brain by activating it. You can't, if you tell yourself not to think about something, that thought of not thinking about that topic activates the topic. So, but if I change the topic, and I say, how do you like this picture that I have of this flower in my office here? Isn't that a nice picture? And do you want to know who painted that? And we talk about that. Suddenly you're not thinking about pink elephants anymore. So here's the trick for your cortex. You can't erase. You must replace. So instead of saying you have to stop thinking something, or you say, I have to turn off my cortex. You can't turn off your cortex. It's not like the television where there's an off button. You got to change the channel. You got to say, what can I think of instead? What can I focus on instead? And so, when I'm worrying about my daughter's not home and she's past her curfew and I'm worried she's been in a car accident, what I should do maybe is get on the phone and talk to a friend, not about my daughter, but just say, hey, how'd your day go? What's going on? And, oh, we had such a fun party for our little 2-year-old today. He blew out his candles, and talking about that. And I'm getting off my daughter had an accident channel, and I'm getting on the 2-year-old birthday party channel. So changing the channel can really just improve your moment-to-moment experience of things. And once people get that, and like I said, mindfulness too is such an important thing. When you start to realize these processes, you can say, oh, there goes my cortex again, trying to scare me, and I have no evidence that there's any infidelity in my marriage. I need to think about something different. What am I going to focus on? Okay, I got to start planning the flowers to plant for this summer. And so what am I going to do? Let's get that catalog out, because when I'm on that infidelity channel, I just stress myself all out, So the cortex is really able to activate the amygdala, not by saying to the amygdala, you should be activated, but just by what it shows it, what it does. The amygdala is watching cortex television.
Mm-hmm. So those are examples of interventions that specifically affect the cortex then.
Mm-hmm. Like if you talk to people about their thoughts matter, and we do this already in various therapeutic approaches, but they matter because they activate your amygdala and they create a lot of distress in your body, in your life. They can create a lot of avoidance in your behaviors because the anxiety, you say, I'm not going there because I just think about going there and I get anxious, So, but cognitive interventions are really trying to change the cortex so it's less likely to activate the amygdala. If you look at it from a neurological point of view, we're trying to reduce the kind of scary thoughts you have. And even kids understand this. One of my clients who was just 14, he was telling me about all the thoughts he has all day about remembering times he'd been bullied and imagining the way different kids in his classes could bully him and how it made him feel so anxious. And I said to him, would you take your little sister to a scary movie? And he said, no, that would be mean. I said, that's what you're doing to your amygdala. You sit there in school and you just think about all these bad things that have happened in the past or that could happen in the future. And your amygdala is seeing all those thoughts. And no wonder you're so stressed out. And he was like, oh, he could understand that. And he drew me a little picture that said, don't scare your amygdala.
I love that.
Yeah. He had a little picture of a round little creature in the middle of his brain with its eyes really big, like, don't scare your amygdala, he said. I got to watch what I think. Sometimes I scare my amygdala for no good reason. because I would say, did that person ever do that to you? Did that person ever make fun of your haircut? No, that's what I thought he was going to do. But, no, he never did that. You're right. I just never. But you suffered, even though it never happened. You suffered through it. And I think it was Mark Twain that said, I've lived through some terrible events in my life, some of which that actually happened. Sometimes you put yourself through so much and it never happens.
Well, thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us today. That's been really incredibly interesting for me. So
I know, isn't our brain fascinating? And it works in a way you might not expect. So we need to know how it works so that we can actually have a response to it. And if people are interested in learning about this, I have the Rewire Your Anxious Brain book, and then I have one specifically about OCD because it's kind of tricky. That's a cortex based. It starts in the cortex, but the amygdala ends up getting all involved, and you do need to treat both the cortex and the amygdala. So I have a Rewire Your OCD Brain, and just a new workbook out for people that's about taming the amygdala, how you can work on taming the amygdala. And it talks about the cortex too, how if you really want your amygdala to stay calm, you can't ignore the cortex. You have to make sure you get the cortex under control, those two pathways.
So aside from the books, if people want to find out more about your work, is there somewhere else they can go?
Well, if therapists, I do some training for therapists through different groups like PESI that provide continuing education like that. And I like to go to the conferences. We have some amazing conferences so those are the ways I would say. By the way, just to mention though, that the books that I have are designed for either a therapist or your average person. They're written not to a neuroscientist, because people who have anxiety are not all neuroscientists. We really need to make sure that people, no matter what their educational level, that they have some way to understand what's happening in the brain. So.
Right. Awesome. So again, thank you so much for this.
Well,
I really enjoyed the conversation.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I really enjoy trying to get this information out there because we all have anxiety.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Michael.